students, Mrs. Girot here. Let's go ahead and do the Unit 3 chapter and test together, shall we? So if you go into your digital photo class and you click on content and you come down to Unit 3 and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll notice there's the Unit 3 test. You're just going to right click on it and open link in new window. And then resize it so you can see both windows. So I've got my test open in this window, and like I keep telling you, these questions go in the exact order of the text. So question number 1 says, in a compact camera, what is the little hole that you look through to frame your subject or scene called? Is it a photonic viewfinder, electronic viewfinder, prismatic viewfinder, or optical viewfinder? So we're going to go ahead and hit 3.01 introduction, and we will start reading. Alrighty. You have to have seen the ads. Everybody who makes digital cameras wants you to believe that it's just so simple. All you have to do is pick up the camera and push the button. Presto, changeo, there are your pictures. It works on television. Then why do mine look like, well, don't look so good? In reality, there are some things you need to know about using your camera, from handling it for the best images all the way through making sure you keep all of your photographs safely stored. Here, we'll look at a number of those things. Handling the camera introduction. Handling the camera. This may seem like keen perception of the obvious, but there are a few things you need to know. More photographs are ruined because the camera was not held appropriately. What the photographer was seeing in the viewfinder was misinterpreted. A little bit of work now can save a lot of bad photographs later. We'll look at the different kinds of viewfinders and how to use them, orienting the camera so it matches your subject, holding the camera so you don't get shaky images, and other things along these lines. Section objectives. After you've completed this section, you'll be able to describe and use the different types of viewfinders, apply image orientation to the subject for maximum impact, explain how to hold the camera for the most stable photography. The viewfinder. The viewfinder lets you frame the photograph before you take it. It's what lets you aim the camera at the scene you want to take. In most compact cameras, there is an optical viewfinder. This is the little hole you can look through. It will zoom in and out with the lens setting you choose, but it does not let you look through the lens you will use to take the picture. One problem with optical viewfinders is they only show about 80% of the scene. This is not the fault of the camera maker. It is simply how the viewfinders have to be made. So here we go. Question 1. In a compact camera, what's the little hole that you look through to frame your subject or scene called? I saw the answer, did you? It's on that page. All right, next. The other big problem with optical viewfinders is that as you get closer to your subject, the more offset it will be in the picture. It will be a little lower in the photograph than you saw in the viewfinder. It will also be shifted a little to one side. This offset is called parallax. The trick here is to know this will happen and adjust for it. Moving the subject down a little and to the right in the viewfinder should correct this. You will have to experiment with your camera. Just remember that parallax gets worse the closer the subject is to your camera. If your subject is 10 feet away, there should be no problem. If your subject is 3 feet away, you will have to make some adjustment. All right, let's take a look at our next question. I forgot to read it. The typical viewfinder in compact camera only shows what percentage of the scene? Did I miss it on the last page, or have we just not hit it? Oh, viewfinders only show about 80% of the scene. Whew, I did miss that one. I better read my questions. Okay, so our next question. The offset between the viewfinder and the lens in compact cameras results in a problem called, yeah, we talked about that, didn't we? On that page, yes. Okay, question 4. An electronic viewfinder uses a separate sensor to display the image in the viewfinder, a portion of the digital signal which is sent to the viewfinder screen, an electronic reflection of the sensor output for the viewfinder, a reflection of the autofocus system as the viewfinder image. So let's find out. Maybe it's on the next page. The second type of viewfinder is the electronic viewfinder. Here, part of the digital signal is sent to a very small screen in the viewfinder. You look into a viewfinder and see almost the same image that the lens taking the photograph will see. There is no problem with parallax here, but because the screen is electronic, it takes battery power. The other problem is that these viewfinders can be a bit jerky. I think that's just supposed to say jerky, not jerkery. The last type of viewfinder is the reflex viewfinder that is used in DSLR cameras. This viewfinder uses a mirror and prism to show you what the lens taking the picture will see. Both the electronic and the reflex viewfinders will show you 95% of the entire scene. Okay, so we want to know about the electronic. Was there a separate sensor to display the image in the viewfinder? A portion of the digital signal sent to the viewfinder screen, or an electronic reflection, or a reflection of the autofocus system? Let's go back and reread it. The second type of viewfinder is the electronic viewfinder. Here, part of the digital signal is sent to a very small screen. I think that's our answer right there. Perfect. Question 5. In landscape orientation, the camera is oriented so that the image conforms the SMTP standards, conforms to SMTE standards, is wider than it is tall, is taller than it is wide. There's a self-check here. Take a few minutes to check your understanding. All right, viewfinder type usually found in compact cameras. Optical. Offset between the taking lens and the viewfinder in compact cameras. Parallax. Percentage of scenes shown by viewfinders in compact cameras, 80%. Percentage of scenes shown by electronic viewfinders, 95%. The format used by digital cameras to store images on a memory card, JPEG. That one was from last chapter. Orienting the camera. One of the things that sets a good photographer apart from an average one is how they hold the camera to frame the subject or scene. Landscape mode. You can hold the camera horizontally, called landscape mode. This is where your image is wider than it is tall. And here's an example of landscape mode. I think that just answered question 5. It's wider than it is tall. Portrait mode, you can hold the camera vertically, called portrait mode. This is where your image is taller than it is wide. All right, next question. In portrait orientation, the camera is oriented so that the image is taller than it is wide. Holding the camera. This may seem a bit simple on the surface, but there is a lot to holding the camera. You have to make sure that when you hold the camera, you're giving it a firm base. If you didn't give it a firm base, you may have blurry pictures because the camera was shaking. Giving the camera a firm base starts with your feet. Standing with your feet about shoulder width apart. Keep your elbows tucked into your sides. This cuts down the possibility of moving while holding the camera. The next thing you want to do, if at all possible, is hold the camera with both hands. Do this even if you are only bracing the bottom of the camera with one hand, just like your Little League coach, your softball coach, your football coach would say, use both hands. Oh, we better look at the next question. When holding the camera, stand with your feet. Oh, what was it? Shoulder width apart, close together, wider than shoulder width. or however you like. It doesn't really matter. Hopefully you got that one. It was on that page. Question 8, when holding the camera, you should try to use one hand to hold the camera and the other to brace yourself against a firm object. 2 hands. One hand to hold the camera and the other to shade the lens, or one hand to hold the camera and the other to shade the viewfinder display. What did your football coach say? Question 9, mastering the technique called the half push will turn on the viewfinder and DSLR cameras, turn on the camera's built-in Wi-Fi capability, lock the image in the camera's memory, greatly reduce shutter lag. Let's find out. Operating the shutter. After you have the scene or subject you are photographing framed in the viewfinder, you simply depress the shutter release button to tell the camera to take the picture. But even this is not really as simple as it sounds. Digital cameras have a lot to do when the shutter button is pushed. Setting the exposure and the focus are the biggies. These take time, so there will be a little lag between the time the shutter button is pushed and the photograph is taken. The lag can be up to half a second. You can almost eliminate this lag by using a technique called the half push. Pushing the shutter button halfway down on your camera sets the exposure and the focus. When you're ready to take the photograph, simply push the shutter button the rest of the way down. All right, so mastering this technique called half push will... Okay, question 10. Stabbing or poking at the shutter button may break the button, lock the button, push that side of the camera down, resulting in crooked photographs, or cause the camera to go into child mode. When you're pushing the shutter button, you want to be very smooth. It's really just squeezing the button. You don't want to stab or poke at the shutter button because that can cause the camera to shake, which would give you a blurry photograph. The other thing that happens if you stab the shutter button is you can actually push that side of the camera down and end up with crooked pictures. All right, so that answered question number 10. Question 11, program mode will automatically set both the shutter speed and aperture, force the camera to look for the appropriate software on the connected laptop, set the aperture, set the shutter speed. Let's find out. Handling the camera review. Take a few minutes to practice reviewing all of the terms and concepts related to handling the camera. Here we go. Landscape orientation. Not sure what I'm supposed to do here. Flip. Image that is wider than it is taller. Portrait orientation. Taller than wider? Got it. Next. Camera orientation. Generally determined by the subject you are photographing. Memory card. Where your image files are stored in your camera. Firm base for camera. Feet shoulder width apart using 2 hands. Red, green, blue. Fundamental colors of the scene that the camera records. Half push. Technique used to reduce shutter lag. All right, and that brought us right back to the beginning. Nice job. Okay, so what were we doing? Program mode will automatically. So let's look at program mode. Digital exposure. Introduction. Digital cameras have come a long way. In the beginning, they were very finicky and often took photographs that were either way too light or way too dark. Now they can be used in almost any light and have very advanced ways to control the amount of light exposing the sensor. But understanding how to judge the exposure of an image is still the key to taking good photographs. You also need to know how to adjust the exposure in case the subject or scene you are photographing needs it. Section objectives. Describe what makes a good exposure. Describe appropriate exposure for an image. explain what exposure compensation is, apply exposure compensation when needed. Digital exposure. And remember what we're looking for? Program mode. All right. Modern digital cameras give you a lot of choices when exposing your photographs. Remember, exposing the photograph means allowing light reflected by the scene to strike the sensor. While these options have their advantages and disadvantages, the technology built into your camera is often the best way to control the exposure. The camera looks at a number of different areas in the image to determine how to set the aperture and shutter. It can do this hundreds of times a second. This is called the programmed mode. So what did the programmed mode do? The camera looks at a number of different areas in the image to determine how to set the aperture and shutter. Good. So, what was the question? Program mode will automatically... What did it say in that sentence? Good. And don't tell anybody, but there are a growing number of professionals who will privately admit that they use the programmed mode. So most of the time, that is the mode to use. All right, let's look at the next question. In a well-exposed image, there should be some detail in the shadows, highlights, midtones, shadows, and highlights. A good example of details in the shadows. Oh yeah, that's nice. Look at all the details here on the floor. You can see the tiles and you can see things happening up in the ceiling and on the sides. There are several things you have to look at to see if the photograph you took has appropriate exposure. The shadows, those dark areas of the image, must have some detail in them. The really light areas of the image, called the highlights, also must have some detail. What does it say? There should be some detail in the colors should look natural. Let's read the next question so we don't miss it. In a well-exposed image, the colors should appear to be very deep, natural, a bit on the light side, or somewhat deeper to allow for printing. The colors should look natural. They shouldn't appear washed out or overly deep. This means the reds should appear to be red and not pink or washed out. Pinks should appear to be pink and not red, overly deep. Okay, that just answered the question. Question 14. After moving your images from the memory card to the computer, you should... Okay, let's continue reading here. There shouldn't be a color cast over the image. A color cast can look like a very light fog all over the photograph. Sometimes it can be gray, but it could also be magenta, a mix of red and blue, or some other color. Digital exposure continued. The two exposure problems that you have to be aware of are overexposure and underexposure. Overexposure happens when too much light strikes the sensor. This will make your photographs very light and washed out. Dark shadows that should be almost black will look gray. There will be no detail in the highlights and they will appear absolutely white. Underexposure happens when not enough light strikes the sensor. This will make your photographs very dark and heavy looking. A lot of the shadows that should be just a bit dark will be almost black. There will really be no highlights. They will all be gray. Remember, question 14 says after moving your images from the memory card to the camera, you should reformat the card so they can be used again, delete the images from the card so it can be used again, initialize the card so the computer can put the security code on it, or use resync.execute to make sure the card is clear. Oh look, we have a nice crossword puzzle. There are a lot of terms in photography. See if you can complete this activity with some of the terms you've learned so far. Dark areas of the image. 2 would be shadows. 4, light areas. Highlights. Push this button to make the exposure. Shutter. 1 down. This orientation is taller than wide. Portrait. 2 down. Camera element that reads the light. Ooh, I want to say sensor. The orientation is wider than it is tall. Landscape. Did sensor work for that? Dark areas. Shadow. Yep, sure did. Perfect. Exposure compensation. While the programmed exposure mode will meet your needs most of the time, there are those situations where you might have to give it a little help. This is where you can use a camera feature called exposure compensation. This feature is usually in the camera's menu, so you might have to look for it a bit at first. The manual that comes with your camera is a great resource. Positive compensation will increase the exposure of your scene or subject by letting more light in. Negative compensation will decrease or darken the exposure. Let's say you're taking a photograph of friends outside on a sunny day. You don't want them squinting into the sun, so you turn them around so the sun is at their back. Now, the problem is that the shadows are so deep, you really can't see them very well. Adding positive exposure compensation of 1 will take care of that, lightening the shadow. Another example. Let's say you bought a car and you want to take a photograph of it to send to friends in an email. The car is white and just overexposes in the photograph to the point that it really looks ugly. Adding a bit of negative exposure compensation will help. Using a setting of -1/2 or -1 can make the car look really good, showing off all the detail. You may have to experiment a bit with these settings, but in the end, knowing what they do and when to use them can really help your photography. Digital exposure review. Take a few minutes to review what you've learned. Adds exposure to the image when needed. Positive exposure compensation. Removes exposure when needed. Negative exposure compensation. Positive exposure compensation lightens shadows. Negative exposure compensation darkens highlights. Offset between taking lens and viewfinder in compact cameras. Parallax. All right, we're going to get to question 14. After moving your images from the memory card to the computer, you should... Moving your photos. Introduction. If there's one part of digital photography that causes more confusion than any other, it is how to move your photographs out of the camera and into the computer. Not to mention how to organize your pictures once they're on the computer. Some people have been known to go so far as in to avoiding this that they will keep the images on the memory card. When the card fills, they buy a new one. For a lot of people, this defeats the flexibility digital photography gives you. It really is not hard to move your photographs to your computer. And whether you have a laptop or a desktop, the process is the same. Here, we'll take a look at moving your images to the computer. Transfer your images from your camera to your computer. Locate your transferred images on your computer. Moving your photos. After you take your photographs, you have to be able to move them into your computer in order to work with them. The first thing you will have to do is connect camera to the computer. If your computer or printer has a built-in card reader, just put the camera's memory card into the card reader. If you're transferring the pictures via a Wi-Fi network or Bluetooth technology, reference your camera's manual and/or your computer's help menu to perform the proper steps. If one of these options aren't available, plug the large end of the USB cable into your computer. The cable usually comes with the camera. Next, plug the small end of the USB cable into the camera. Finally, turn the camera on and the computer should recognize the camera just like it recognizes your MP3 music player and another external device, like an external hard drive. If you use the software that came with your camera, it may open automatically to guide you through the process. If your software doesn't open automatically or you're not using photo organization software, an import wizard should open. It will ask if you want to transfer the images on your camera to your computer. Click OK and follow the on-screen directions. Generally, the wizard will have you move your pictures to your My Pictures folder if you are using Windows, On Macintosh and Linux systems, the folder is simply called Pictures. Before you move the photographs, you will want to rename the file to something a bit more descriptive. DCIM is fine for the camera, but Friends 615 tells you what is in the file in human terms. It is also a helpful reminder of the approximate date of the photo. Usually the wizard will prompt you to do this. After the files are transferred to your computer, make sure they are removed from the memory card in the camera. Use the delete function. Do not under any circumstances reformat the card. After this is done, turn the camera off and then unplug it from the computer. So for me, I see what they're saying. It says after moving your images from the memory card to the computer, delete the images from the card so that it can be used again. On my camera, this is kind of interesting. I delete my pictures, but for some reason, I have to reprogram my card every single time. Even though I hit delete, it won't take any pictures until I reformat it, which is super easy. You just go and reformat it, like all of your settings, you'll have reformat in there somewhere. So if you run into the same kind of situation that I have on mine, after you delete your pictures, you still might have to reformat it. I don't know if that's just a kink in my camera or other people's cameras kind of are the same way. Question 15. To archive your images, you should only have them stored on your computer's hard drive, write them to a floppy disk, upload all of them to your My Pictures account, back them up on an external hard drive. So to archive your pictures, let's see. Before the days of digital imaging, most of the storage space in a photographer's studio was devoted to storing images. Negatives were kept in special glassine sleeves or in special plastic pages. All of the negatives were kept in 3-ring binders or in manila envelopes and file drawers. Slides were kept in special plastic or fiberboard boxes. Prints were kept in glassine envelopes. Today, a couple of CDs or DVDs, a USB thumb drive, or an external hard drive, the best backup method, can hold the entire contents of a photographer's studio storage. It will be more organized than even the most refined filing system of the past. Objectives: describe what archiving is, create a folder naming system that works for you, archive your images safely, explain how to safely store your archives. Archiving your photographs means making a permanent copy of them that is stored outside of your computer. There are a lot of reasons to do this. Computers' hard drives fail, or the computer breaks altogether. Note, external hard drives can fail too, but the data on them is much easier to recover than the data on a failed internal computer hard drive. Operating systems can become corrupt and stop working. Your software can become corrupt and stop working. Your younger sibling could accidentally delete them. Your older sibling could accidentally delete them. The list goes on and on. So you need to have a permanent backup copy of your photographs. Now that you have your photographs safely archived, I feel like I missed a page. Yep. One of the things you need to do right at the beginning is devise a folder naming system. A good naming system will allow you to go back and find any image you've taken, even if it was taken a couple of years ago. Now, everybody has to come up with their own naming system, but here are some things you need to think about. Keep the names short enough to be read easily. Make the names descriptive rather than numeric or by date. And I personally like to do my dates first and then my descriptor, because then pictures that were taken on the same date will all show up together. Whereas if you just have descriptors first, if you go alphabetically, you can have pictures from like 1960 next to pictures from 2016. And if you're trying to find your 2016, party pictures, you kind of want them all in the same place. That's my thinking. That's how I do it. You have to decide though. Make the name generic enough to describe the photographs in the folder. All right, now that you have your photographs safely archived, you have a permanent record that you can always go back to should something happen. Remember, the options for archiving are fairly numerous, but the most important thing is that you find a backup process that works for you and helps to keep all of your photographs stored safely and in an organized way. Archiving options: external hard drive, includes flash drives, a USB thumb drive, which is the same as a flash drive, SDHC memory cards, a CD or DVD, and cloud storage. Now, I've always heard that if a photograph is something that you really don't ever want to lose, to save it to 2 different backups. So if you have it on cloud storage, have it on a thumb drive too. Archiving your photographs review. Here we go. In landscape orientation, the camera is oriented so the image is wider than it is tall. An electronic viewfinder uses a portion of the digital signal which is sent to the viewfinder screen. In portrait orientation, the camera is oriented so that the image is taller than wider. When holding the camera, stand with your feet shoulder width apart. When holding your camera, you should use 2 hands. Mastering the technique called the half push will greatly reduce shutter lag. Stabbing or poking at the shutter button may push that side of the camera down, resulting in crooked photographs. In a well-exposed image, there should still be some detail in the shadows and highlights. The offset between the viewfinder and the lens in compact cameras results in a problem called parallax. To archive your images, you should back them up to an external hard drive or USB thumb drive. In a well-exposed image, the colors should appear to be natural. After moving your images from the memory card to the computer, you should delete the images from the card so it can be used again. In a compact camera, the little hole that you look through to frame your subject or scene is called optical. The typical viewfinder in a compact camera only shows what percentage of the scene? 80. Program mode will automatically set both the shutter and aperture. All right, perfect. That was nice. Okay, so question 15, to archive your images, you should back them up, external hard drive or USB. And I think that ends it. So thanks so much for joining me. You can now take that quiz if you haven't been taking it already. All right.